Today we're going to cover a 5-point hip mobility checklist, and to do that we're going to look at specific climbing moves so you can choose the climbing moves you need to address most, and then we're going to show you stretches that you need to do to improve them. The first move we're going to get better at is a tight heel hook. So we've got a really good example here. I'll pull on, go up. I need to get my heel in here to go up, heel in, rock into it, and up to this handhold. To get better at this move, we need to address two things: hip flexion and external rotation. We lift the foot up to flexion, we need to point the knee out, hip external rotation, and then pull in with the glutes and then up. Let's go over a few ways of how you can improve this move. So a solid benchmark I think everyone should be able to achieve if they're going to be able to do high level heel hooks like that is to be able to sit in this 90-90 position, turn their torso over their front leg, and without crunching, bring their chest down to their knee. This achieves two things. It's that external rotation of the hip, and it's the hip flexion as you lean forwards. One kind of cheat I don't want you to do is to bring this leg in and tuck it in. You'll see people doing a pigeon pose like this with that leg tucked in. This removes the external rotation that we need when we're doing heel hooks. So on that leg out in 90 degrees, and I want the torso over this leg, not over here. This is going to get that external rotation we want, as well as the hip flexion. Something to be aware of this position is potentially the stress that goes through the knee, that twisting, because if the twist can't happen at the hip, it gets transferred down to the knee. And that's why it's actually crucial we develop flexibility in the hip. So when we do those hard heel hooks, we're not transferring all of that torque to our knee because the movement is alleviated at the hip through that external rotation. That's why when you're in this position, I want you to make sure that you're gradually leaning into it with good form, but not pushing it so hard that you're feeling any pain in the knee. If you need to prop up the knee a little bit for a little less external rotation, keep that form, keep over this leg, just prop the knee up slightly and then progress it as time goes on. If we need to regress this position at all, I'm going to do it in this reclined pigeon pose, crossing the leg over my knee like this. Again, I'm not going to put the foot on because this can torque the knee more. I'm actually going to bring it a little bit more across like here and just bring this in, wrapping my knee and pulling gently towards me with a similar stretch, but a slightly easier position. If we want to make the position more advanced, go back to that 90-90, keeping my torso over this leg, not facing over here. I'm then going to bring this leg behind me into hip extension and moving more into that pigeon pose. Here, people are mostly restricted by the hip extension. It's going to force you more over this leg into a deeper stretch. So this one is much more advanced for people, particularly if you're strict with this position. If I go to here, it becomes really easy. I just kind of lay over this front leg. I'm not really getting a stretch in the hip. I'm getting a stretch more through my adductors and through my glutes. I want to be strict in this position here. So if you can't get that hip down to the floor, it's quite an active position to hold. So to make it easier, we'll take a block, we'll put it underneath the hip here. And this just means we can relax in this position a little bit more. If that's torquing the knee too much, again, you can just raise the knee slightly here. And we'll be in this strict position where we're in line. We're not putting weight over the heel, it's more going over the knee. And this is much easier to hold for a longer period of time if you're sticking to your static stretching. This next flexibility requirement is often said to be the most important in climbing, partly because it's so obvious when we can open our hips, we get more weight over our feet and we're able to get under holds like slopes and pinches better, but also it's super versatile. You can use it on slab terrain, you can use it on overhanging terrain. And here's a good example of getting your feet high, but keeping your hips close to the wall. This open hip position on the wall is often referred to as the frog position. And so people typically stretch it with a frog stretch. However, if you've watched this channel, you might know I'm not a fan of the frog stretch unless you're already quite advanced in your flexibility, and then I think it has more utility. If you're still just starting to work on your flexibility, there's better positions for you. A very simple one to do, which is going to be part of my checklist because it's easy to measure, is going to be this butterfly pose position. This is because we can measure the angle of our knees going down quite simply with yoga blocks. For me, there's a tall, a mid, and a short version of this measurement. I'd say a good benchmark for open hip position is that medium range, where you can get a touchdown with your knees on the blocks. Obviously, as you get more advanced, you lower them to the floor, and then eventually you can try and get a full touchdown reaching the floor with your knees. There are countless ways to develop this position and train it. We can do isometrics moving up, so you can squeeze the adductors using a contract relax method. You can also contract the agonist muscles, contracting down into blocks, which is an excellent way to strengthen your open hip position. You can add weights to your knees and do repetitions. But probably the easiest way is either just to put weights on your knees and just allow that passive stretch to take your knees down and put a stretch into your adductors, or to gently lean forwards, slightly more advanced, and reach forwards into this position with a good morning position. These are both good options for just a really simple static stretch, which you can hold for 30 to 60 seconds. If you're really struggling in this position and your knees are already this high, you might want to raise your hips a little bit by sitting on a block, getting slightly further above your knees, and then again placing weights. If you're really tight up here, you're going to need some assistance. Just letting your knees sit there for hours is going to do absolutely nothing. If this is still you, extra weight and work on contracting your glutes and feeling that awareness of how you actually open your hip position. This next technique is bridging or stemming, and I think when people visualize this movement, they typically think of training like a side split. But I'm going to show on this climb how typically it's more of a front split. We tend to drop the knee or twist the hips in when we're in this wide position. So the advantage of this twisted position when we're doing a wide stem or bridge is it allows us to actually get wider. There's more range of motion when we twist our hips into more of a front split, typically for just the position of people's hips and the type of flexibility people will have. And the second reason, and why we would do this anyways, even if we did have the flexibility to do a really good side split, is because it's going to bring us closer to the wall, just like a drop knee. If I drop this hip in, I come under this hold, and I can hold it with like barely any fingers. It's going to be much more efficient for my body position. So crucially, to get better at this, we need to work on hip extension on that back leg, being able to go into more of a front split. One of my favorite ways to train this hip extension, and by hip extension I mean that's this leg going back like this and kind of deviating from that line of your lower back, is through a long lunge. And it's because a long lunge is an active position where you're actively driving back through your leg. If you're ever doing a bridging or stemming position, you have to push back into that hold to keep engaged. It's not passive, you're not just standing on your feet, you're pushing into them. So when we do a long lunge position, we're going to go into a kneeling position. And I think a good place that everyone should be able to achieve is kneeling from 90 degrees and being able to extend that back leg without moving up. It's easy to extend the back leg if we do this, because then there's no hip extension. But if we move our leg back and we push that knee towards the sky without raising up, this is good hip extension, and we're driving into that back foot. This is developing the control and strength to be in hip extension. I mentioned that you can cheat this hip extension by going up. You can also cheat this hip extension by leaning forwards with it, right? So what I'm trying to do when I'm doing hip extension or this long lunge position is I want to push that knee back so that this femur, my leg, deviates back from my lower back, and I'm not just moving with it. I'm not just doing this and I'm staying in line. I want hip extension like I'm in that front split position. So I'm moving that leg back towards the sky. And of course, then we can create more length in this long lunge position as we advance it more. The two things to remember with a long lunge is to keep it low and long. Don't lean forwards, don't stand up. If you're doing this correctly, you should feel the stretch on the front of your hip on that leg that's moving back. And if you have tight quads as well, you might feel it a little bit through your quads too. Another added benefit of this, if you're starting with poor hip extension in the first place, you'll find this transfers quite well to high steps, because as you bring your foot up and you rock your hips forwards, your hip needs to extend in a high step. So this can transfer to multiple other movements in your climbing. The long lunge is very active, and in that sense it's quite advanced. If you want to find a regression for this one, it's going to be very much like the couch stretch. You can do this with your foot on a couch, and then all you're going to do is just lean into it. Again, we're trying to keep our lower back straight into the ground, tensing our glutes to then just extend that back leg. You'll find you come into a stretch very quickly with this one. So just a standard couch stretch is a more passive and more kind of beginner variation of just going into this hip extension, consciously activating these glutes to try and squeeze that leg back without folding into it. This next technique is a drop knee, and this one is almost the opposite to like the pigeon stretch that we did. This is going to require internal rotation. So if I pull on from here, I get this foot on, I want to drop that knee in to bring my body in and pull up. I think this is quite a good example of quite an advanced drop knee because it's on an overhang. And so rather than just pushing back into it to keep my weight through my feet, I actually have to pull away from the wall. So I'm actively dropping this knee in and then pushing back as well as twisting my hips in. So my hips will turn away from it, but there's still a lot of internal rotation I'm gonna do, particularly as I initiate that move, getting it quite square on and dropping that knee in and pulling up. How did I do that move last time? Similar to heel hooks, and like so with the pigeon stretch, if we don't possess the internal or external rotation of the hip, that torque often gets pushed into our knee, and that's why this often can feel like quite risky on our knees, doing extreme drop knees or extremely high heel hooks. But if we've got that freedom of movement in the hip, it's going to allow that rotation, and it's going to take away all of that force being directed into the knee. I said that drop knees are a little bit like the opposite of a tight heel hook in that they need internal rotation rather than external rotation. And so we're going to go back into this 90-90 position to often stretch that internal rotation. If we lean forwards into here, we get the external rotation. But if we try and drop that hip back and move towards the back leg, this is going to force this femur into internal rotation. And what we'll find is we get a stretch through the outside of our glutes there. And this is a great internal rotation stretch. When you think about moving this hip towards the floor, you don't need to sit upright. Most people won't have the range of motion just in their hip joint to be able to be upright. So leaning back is totally fine for this one. But you're trying to bring that hip down towards the floor a little bit. And again, small range of motion for this one will probably bring on a stretch pretty quickly. You don't need to push it too hard. This position is going to be very similar to what I think should be on your checklist for hip mobility for climbers. And it's going to be 90-90 switchbacks. So you're going to be in this position. And what I think you should be able to do if you have good internal rotation is seated without support, drop your knee towards the floor, and you're going to open up all the way until you can't anymore and this leg starts to rise. And then you're going to drop this one all the way towards the floor, and you're just going to repeat this motion doing switchbacks. If you still need support to do this, that's totally fine. You're going to work on just the range of motion, and eventually you can sit up, build a little bit more control, strength through your hip flexors to do this as well. Working on those switchbacks. It's a good level of flexibility to have in your internal rotation. If you want to go slightly more advanced, and I said this while doing the technique, often we're actually trying to pull actively our hips into the wall. And to do that, we need to engage those muscles which actually pull us into internal rotation. So facing the front leg without too much lean forwards, you're going to try and lift that back leg off the ground. You're going to actively be using those internal rotators to lift that foot off the ground and lift up. If you can get really high, bring it back until you find a bit more of a stretch, and then lift so you're just always working in that end range of motion. If you're leaning forwards and you go all the way up here, you need to bring it back a little bit so you're stressing that end range, really working on those muscles. A slightly easier variation for this one is just going to be laid on the floor like this. Bring your feet apart a little bit and then drop your knees in together. This is also internal rotation. You can walk your feet out further and drop your knees into internal rotation, do both hips at the same time. I do find, however, though, if that you've already got a good level of flexibility and you go really wide and start to drop in, it can put quite a lot of pressure on your knees, and this might become a bit painful. So I generally will stick to this one as a slightly more easier variation. And when you get more advanced, move to the 90-90. This next technique is a heel hook again. Now we've already covered a tight in heel hook, and this is going to be a wide heel hook. And this often happens on like compression boulders, and this is a great example of it. My hand's going to be on here and I need to bring my foot to my hand, but I'm in quite a wide position. The main difference here is that my leg is going to be a lot straighter, meaning my hamstring is lengthened and I'm in a hamstring stretch, and I don't need nearly as much external rotation. Typically what will hold people back here is the hamstring flexibility to meet their hand and then have that stability when the leg is straight. Any of these, I guess, wide box positions, compression positions, when your heel is going to be far away from you, is going to require hip flexion because you're bringing it up high, and that's going to be hamstring flexibility. But also, we often want that open hip position. We want to wrap ourselves around the boulder, so we want hip adductor flexibility as well. So we're looking at hip flexion, hip abduction as well. So For these wide positions where you might be in compression and you need to get a foot out to your hand, and it's not tight in like this, where the hamstring is not lengthened, when it's out here and it is lengthened, my favorite position to stretch this is a pancake split. And it's because it's kind of going to do two things at the same time. I would generally advise people to go for their widest pancake because most people can't just fold into a side split. If you can, then either you don't need this video because you already know a lot about stretching and you've done it for years, or you're gifted genetically and again, you probably don't need to do much stretching. But for most people, they're going to find that they are probably in a decent width for a pancake. And if I always advise to go maximum, it's always going to mean you're going to get some sort of adductor stretch while doing this. And then in the form of doing the pancake fold in this pancake split position means we're going to stretch the hamstrings. When we fold forwards, our hamstrings lengthen, as well as our adductors as well. This means when we train the pancake stretch, it gives us a really good amount of flexibility for those heel hand matches. And if you can fold down to a decent degree, you're going to have enough flexibility in your legs for a lot of those movements you'll find on compression boulders. My level for this checklist is going to be quite advanced because I really am quite biased for this position. I think it's really helpful, but I also like climbing on compression boulders a lot. So I'm going to say we're going to put 2 fists on the floor and try and reach our forehead to our fists. You can round your back, that's totally fine, but this is a good level of flexibility in your pancake and in your hamstrings. I would make a confident bet that a lot of people watching this video won't be able to do 2 fists straight away, but you can set your own benchmarks. You can use a yoga block, and then once you get past 2 fists, you can go to 1 fist, or then you can even go nose to floor, chin to floor, chest to floor, as you flatten out through your pancake. But that's not the best way to train it if you're still struggling to get to, let's just say, 1 yoga block. You're probably going to want to start this pancake stretch standing up. Personally, I like to coach this when someone's completely new to this stretch with a standing good morning variation. And so this would be standing in that wide position, but in this case, not as wide as you can go. We're going to bring it in slightly, and then we're going to fold forwards, keeping our back flat in this position. Particularly if you've not done this before, you need to build awareness of what your hips are doing, moving back and folding and coming down in this position. Generally, before you graduate to a more advanced variation, I want to be able to see you go to a 90-degree bend in the hip, holding onto a weight and moving back without kind of moving around the weight and moving around your hamstring tightness. I don't want to see people kind of doing this and moving and crunching their abs. It should be coming from your hips. We're learning to isolate that movement. If you can reach 90 degrees and you understand how your hips are folding this position, we can make this a little bit more advanced and move into a pancake Jefferson curl. So here we'll curl into it's fine, and then I want you to extend out the bottom as well, moving your elbows towards the floor. And here we're extending through the spine. We're not crunching our abs necessarily. And then moving back up into the standing position. And like we do for the good morning, I would repeat this for repetitions, pausing in that end range. Once you've progressed for a good depth of that pancake Jefferson curl, and your elbows are getting close to the floor and your legs are getting slightly wider apart, we're going to move it to sat on the floor again, but often in an elevated position. When we elevate our hips, it allows us to get over the hips more and allows us to just get into the stretch easier. Just like going to standing is easier than sat on the floor, sat elevated is easier than sat on the floor too. So we're going to fold into this position. From here, we can do weighted good mornings using a weight. We can also do reaching exercises. Lots of different ways to train a pancake, but the position comes before the method of stretching you use. And so we can also just sit here and hold a static stretch if we wanted to. The thing with this checklist is it's not exactly exhaustive for climbing. Climbing movement often gives us almost unlimited opportunities to find weird and unique body positions. And there's positions like just the squat that I think is super important to climbing because it improves ankle flexibility and also hip flexion. Being able to sit in a good squat gives you the ability to do a fundamental high step in climbing. But I think these 5 points, this checklist, covers 5 really key climbing movements that are quite advanced when it comes to flexibility. And if you can tick off these 5 different positions on that checklist, then you are well on your way to developing well-rounded flexibility for advanced rock climbing. Let me know how many of these 5 positions you've managed to tick off of this checklist in the comments below. Thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you next time.